Okay, it's the same apartment. I'm trying to find a position. So the window is over here, and last time I sat like this and there's too much glare or light in my eyes, which apparently is not a good idea when you record. So I have turned around and facing a little bit away from the window, and hopefully the glare is reduced. But it's the same apartment. So let's look at 4 levels of capacity in capacity building. Before getting into what capacity development for resilience entails, it's helpful to consider that capacity can be conceptualized on different but interdependent levels. For example, the capacity of a community to construct levees to protect it against floods involves not only a number of trained and equipped community members contributing with their labor, but also how they are organized, the policies and legislation relevant for such endeavors, etc. These levels can be defined in different ways, much like the various ways in which it's possible to slice a cake. So you can see that implicitly we are saying this is a community effort, this is a common resource, and we're talking about sustaining the commons by protecting against floods and working together in a legal framework that exists and policies that guide such organizations. And then there are roles for community members in the hierarchy, in the action situations, in terms of what labor they contribute and what they are trained to do and what they are equipped to do, and so on and so forth. So one way of slicing the cake and defining capacity levels comes from CEDA's Manual for Capacity Development, which you can look up. This approach defines 6 levels of capacity, ranging from individual knowledge and professional skills through units of an organization and system of organizations, to institutional frameworks and environment/contextual factors. So look at a figure in a minute. It's mainly a structural approach, with the 4 first levels strictly corresponding to a hierarchical levels of elements of human environment systems, i.e. a number of individuals form a unit of an organization, a number of such units form an organization, and a number of organizations form a system of organizations. This approach also highlights the importance of formal and informal institutions that lay down the rules of the game and the standards for the ways in which the actors may participate and relate to each other and to their environment, as well as the context in terms of available resources and of obstacles and opportunities that influence operations. So it's using many words, but it's very exactly the same, in fact, as what we discussed in the section on sustaining the commons based on Elinor Ostrom's work, which is not referenced here, but it's about there it was described as action situation and players, their hierarchical roles and the rules that apply to them. There was a biophysical environment, there were boundary rules, and so on and so forth. So it's a different way of saying it, and that came out of Elinor Ostrom's fieldwork. And there we ran into scale issues, that sustainability is a global issue, sustaining the commons under climate change is a global issue. So how to scale up from a small institution of managing a levee or a irrigation system and so on to managing global issues. Here we are not discussing so much the scale, even though we did that before. So keeping that in mind, here is figure 9.1, capacity levels according to CEDA and UNDP and CADRI. So you can look up these, United Nations Development Program and so on. So here you have individuals, organizational and enabling environment with intersections between them and all of them, between 2 of them and all of them. And here you have the factors in capacity building: environment and contextual factors, institutional frameworks, systems of organizations, organization itself, units in an organization, and individual knowledge and professional skills. So we built it up this way. Individual knowledge and professional skills came together as a group in units, and units formed an organization, and the organization then combined with other organizations, there could be governance, there could be people who are actually doing the work, people who are setting the policies, people who are setting the legal framework or monitoring and evaluating and so on. So that gave us systems of organizations, and we had institutional frameworks to govern these things or have them function in the action situations. And of course we are worried about environment and contextual factors for capacity levels, right? So another highly influential way of approaching capacity levels comes from the UN system, stating that capacity resides at 3 interrelated levels that we talked about here: individual, organizational, and the enabling environment. The individual level, the organizational level, and the enabling environment. The individual level in this approach concerns the knowledge and skills of people that allow them to perform key tasks, while the organizational level concerns internal policies, procedures, and processes that allow an organization to perform by enabling individual capacities to come together to achieve its goals. Finally, the enabling environment concerns aspects of the broader human environment system within which individuals and organizations perform their tasks. This is at times referred to as the societal level or the network level, and can either facilitate or seriously impede capacity development. So it depends on how the rules, norms, punishments, and the functioning in the action situation are working, how the network is performing, whether it's just bogged down in conflicts, or whether it's really working smoothly to facilitate capacity development. Okay, so the enabling environment is less straightforward to grasp than the individual and organizational levels. It includes foundations for how a society works, including the interaction between organizations, legislations, policies, procedures, power relations, norms, values, etc. However, it's often here that changes must be made for real transformation to be sustainable. So somehow there has to be a framework within which the organizations work, and the enabling environment is kind of, we use the term wicked problem, so we have to set up the environment where difficult problems with multiple stakeholders and multiple agents have to function, and then you have to worry about various factors like equity, justice, and so on in real situations. Both these approaches have their merits as well as their similarities and differences. They both describe individual capacity in very similar terms, focusing on individual knowledge and skills. Although I think they are right that such knowledge and skills are fundamental for the capacity of a human environment system to perform vital functions for its resilience, they both neglect the importance of other necessary resources that these individuals need to be able to contribute. Okay, so they may have capacity and knowledge, but to be able to contribute, they need certain enabling environment, let's say. Okay. Okay, so where was I? So what do they need? They need tools, equipment, vehicles, money. So finance is always important, and it is true that CEDA's approaches includes such resources in its most overarching level called environment/contextual factors, but in a very macroscopic sense of inflation rates, quality of infrastructure, access to electricity and telecommunications, etc. So it's talking about general infrastructure and not specific things such as tools, equipment, vehicles, money, etc. Okay, these are obviously important inputs to the design of any capacity development initiatives, but I think it's more fruitful for grasping capacity to focus on the more specific resources that are needed to perform key functions for resilience. Okay, so just look at this figure again. Environment and contextual factors in CEDA's framework are part of the tools, equipment, etc. needed, but they are not really enabling for the individual level. They are more for the infrastructure needed for the institution or institutions to function. Okay, so a slight difference you have to keep in mind. Okay, so where was I? Includes both these approaches have their merits as well as their similarities and differences. I already talked about this, so let's go here. While SIDA's 6-level approach is helpful in explicitly pointing out the various hierarchical levels of organization to be addressed, the UNDP CADRI approach is merging 3 of these into one level, focusing more on functional aspects of organization as such. It depends on to what details you go in representing your schematic, however, or network. However, the last of the 4 hierarchical levels, called the system of organizations, is instead included in the enabling environment. This is a weakness in the otherwise rather comprehensive UNDP CADRI approach, since this is vital. This is a vital aspect for grasping the capacity of human environmental systems, then is easily lost in the complexity of everything else in the enabling environment. Finally, the levels referred to as institutional frameworks and the rest of the enabling environment are both including a mix of legislation, policy, procedures, power relations, norms, values, etc. So let's define CADRI completely here. I was being a little lazy there. Okay, so I, as usual, forgot capacity for disaster reduction initiative. Okay, whether that came out under the US or there is a cadre.net. So if you want to read a bit more about, is a global partnership. So there you go, capacity for disaster reduction initiative, CADRI. So it's obviously a bit made up, but nonetheless you get the sense. Okay, regardless of what literature you read or which approach to capacity levels you choose, it's fundamental to appreciate the importance of grasping and addressing capacity holistically for any human environment system in question. Disregarding any of the levels severely undermines the effectiveness of most capacity development initiatives I can conceive. This is why I suggest being more explicit in focusing on the functions that contribute to the resilience of a human environment system and in the range of elements needed to be able to perform them. This connects back to the operationalization of resilience in Chapter 6 and entails a slight restructuring of capacity levels of the approaches presented above. The capacity of human environment system to perform the functions contributing to its resilience is therefore in this context determined by the complex combination of the knowledge, skills, tools and other resources available in the system, its organization on all levels, its rules, regulations and other formal institutions, and the norms, values and other informal institutions underlying them, as we will see here. So this is just a slightly different way of presenting the ideas we discussed in Sustaining the Commons. Okay, so 4 levels of capacity contributing to the ability of a human environment system to perform functions necessary for its resilience. You want to build towards capacity, so you have to have norms, values and other informal institutions. Norms are basically internalized rules. Let's say when you are a customer and there is a vendor, you are dealing with each other repetitively in an action situation, let's say in the market. Both of you know what the rules are and they have just internalized them, and when the rules are broken, then one or the other reacts depending on who broke the rule and who is getting affected negatively by it and so on. So you have rules, regulations and other formal institutions to deal with such conflicts, and you have organization on all levels when you have a successful capacity set up. So you have knowledge, skills, tools and other resources available for all the actors in the action situations who are interacting repetitively to build capacity so that you can reach your capacity here. Okay, so we'll come back and look at capacity development for resilience in the next podcast. So a few too many words, and I'm going to read them because they are important. But when you combine with the other podcasts in the other books, you get a better sense of what specific contexts what the specific contexts are in which all these come together. Okay, so let's meet in the next podcast.